don't have a choice. I mean, that doesn't sound right.
It's 20.
He's joining us on Thursday. He's going to be here Thursday.
Yeah.
Because and roads to this yes, I'm just assuming. Sorry about that. Am I wrong? You're going to the vet tomorrow.
No, they're the same. No, I'm sure.
That's what we did. Because we'll be making mandala offerings, of course. Good.
I don't know. Take the thing with you and we get
If I can get it, I'll just see it.
All right, so we start with a praise to Manjushri. Just a second.
understanding shines forth as the sun unclouded by defilements or trace of ignorance. He teaches in 60 ways the Father for his only Son. All creatures caught in prisons of Santara. He lives in the darkness of their kingdoms, overwhelmed by their suffering. You, whose dragon-covered proclamation of God, arouses us from the sleeper of our delusions and frees us from the iron chains of our karma. Whose powerful sword of wisdom hews down suffering wherever it sprouts appear, clearing away the darkness of all ignorance. I entreat you to honor Geshe, whose princely body is adorned with 112 marks of the work, who has completed in stages achieving the highest perfection of Bodhisattva, who has been pure from the beginning. O my Geshe, all loving one, the brilliance of your wisdom, illuminate the darkness enclosing my mind, enlighten my intelligence and wisdom, so that I may gain insight into the Buddha's words and the texts that explain them.
Sanji Jagan Sopi Chonamla Chancho Badu Dami Kapsi Jagi Chishi Gibi Sonamji Jola Beche Sanji Jubarasho Sanji Jagan Sopi Chonamla Chancho Badu Dami Kapsi Jagi Chishi Gibi Sonamji Jola Beche Sanji Jubarasho Sanji Chodam Sobi Chonamla Chancho Badu Dani Kabzi Dagi Chiri Jibe Sonam Jola Beje Sanji Drubarasho Kanki Tuzini Zuni Tawa Kamji Tambichun Dunzi Kodu Kela Chanzelo Good morning, everyone. Cousin Sajid Sumbadgin Sim Tena Lam Drabal La Table Member the Cable Sheban said. Then the chances Sem Top Give him the Devasiji. Do just change your number churches.
We'll continue with the 7th chapter from Shantidev's Guide to Bodhisattva Way of Life, the chapter that teaches joyous effort. We are currently looking at the last section that remedies laziness of discouragement. And we're going to pick up from verse 29. Let's look at, first of all, the outline just to see where we are in the text. So, we've been looking at point C in the section that explains the abandoning of laziness that is disheartened about virtue. Point C says if one makes perseverance, laziness will be arrested and one will be capable of accomplishing enlightenment. Of the fourth point in this section, we are currently covering the fourth point. There is no suffering in that and happiness increases, therefore it is reasonable to take joy in that. And verse 29 comes at the heading of due to such reasons, in terms of progressing along the path, they are explained to be more knowledgeable than a Hinayanist in verse 29. Let's look at verse 29. Verse 29 says, due to the strength of the mind of enlightenment, he exhausts his previous negativities and gathers oceans of merits. Hence, he is said to excel the hearers.
디 다디칼이야 다주 디 chanju sem ki top di khanda chiyoreslam ta ani ta nyentu gi lamle che shu di kyabar di pawa chiki ani top che chiyores ro pena ta chanju sem ya nyamne chiyo teba chimbo timba ina ya ani nyentu ni kyabar di pawa chiki lamle laba ya keba ani di gi chanju sem di ta digba seba chibala ya ani lam shen kebar di pabi ta ani phachulane me bachiyores.
The main point that is expressed in that section emphasizes the strength of bodhicitta, the mind of enlightenment. Due to the strength of bodhicitta, the mind of enlightenment, this path surpasses the path of, for example, hearers in terms of its ability, for example, to eliminate negativity. So in that sense, there is a particular strength, special strength and force that is attributed to the path that is combined with bodhicitta.
Terida contrast res laung digi penata shendun la ya ani thachik tutsembe ani sem thi tobgi ani khungi tegba seba cheba mase ani thadika la ya penata chik ani ta ni khoya la soba ani chik ta chik bi phame bi kap deba ina ya ani sem thi tobgi ani sonum pe pagmeba sa tu yores tenza sonum jamso tawe pe doa chingi di ani chanju sem de chagwanza ani nyedu namni khabar pawares chok kiba shevares.
And also, due to the strength of the mind of enlightenment, which is motivated to be of benefit to others, not only the power of purification of past accumulated negative actions becomes great in that it surpasses the power of the path of the Hinayanist. Also, as we said, even while you're asleep or being unconscientious, your merit increases. Innumerable or inestimable merit is still being accumulated. So that is due to the force of bodhicitta. And as this section says, therefore, the strength of the mind of enlightenment surpasses, or the path of the mind of enlightenment surpasses the path of Hinayanists.
Terida, tachidan shugo jimari tine, reda chanjuk sem ki tse simbi topki, pena susu ta ni kuba ina ya, ni de, ani gewa tsam mase, ani teba chimbi uchola ya rochi, kanji kala saya, tano danganzu chik, ani tsikdi kenzara dumado kanji, ani chabsang ro sunjene, ani samlo tangdang, ani keba ina, ani chola rochi. So
in short, we're looking at activities such as, for example, sleep. So due to bodhicitta, even sleep can become virtue, but not just virtue. We speak here about particular type of virtue, the Mahayana virtue, which means that even trivial activities such as, for example, food, and even it might sound a bit awkward, even when you go to the loo, you can still then create virtue that is considered to be a Mahayana virtue through the force of your motivation. Let's look at the commentary of Gyeta Dhammarinchen. It says, since those with compassion exhaust previous negativities with the power of the mind of enlightenment, and because they contain an ocean of accumulations of merits and wisdom, they are said to be superior in progressing along the path than the hearers.
Chanju sembi chabala giluba mirites gilu cheche lelo cheche ni erichi ani tus 와 육샤와디 자원이니 민지과지레스로 대위 경험 콘셉트 장주선기 따시는 되는데 원저와는 셈시 수시기루교스.
Therefore, point in that section draws a conclusion. It is unreasonable to be disheartened, to be discouraged in the Bodhisattva's conduct. In verse 30, it says, so having mounted the horse of the mind of enlightenment that dispels all disheartenment and weariness and proceeds from happiness to happiness, which ones who knows this mind would lapse into despondency. Which one, who knows this mind would lapse into despondency.
대단히 남자 참이 생여로서 여러분이 같이 전주에 전주생 꼴이야 까미카도 소나야 롱디 다나기어레스 대교 콘셉트 전주생이 따신 덴데원도라 셈식 수식 비르교세 그래서 디nen가 좀 쇼치 송구여 이어레스라.
We've all attended numerous teachings by His Holiness Dalai Lama. So you might remember encountering this verse before when His Holiness teaches from Shantideva's Guide to Bodhisattva Way of Life, or when he teaches about bodhicitta in general, he often quotes this verse, which signifies its importance. So let's look at that again. It says, so having mounted the horse of the mind of enlightenment that dispels all disheartenment and weariness and proceeds from happiness to happiness, which ones who knows of this mind would lapse into despondency?
Benajunju the Lewi Bari any Lew Trupa Dumba the Tutala shoot the Sungugasra Dinan the Jarum Sunjuka Sonia Tawa Tony any G and Zao Sheddar down Woman Juba any Rinchen Dinji long carting Kadin song there any Chanjusam call song the Junju Kashima tension Dinan that and two to the suited Sungores Dinza the Nyonshijimoto Yomaresra Dinamala Nenga Yons Soba and Gatsa Koran song there to Zo and Yaruchi and Song does Dinza under the Zun Juchin and the Tolaya is song down to Vana and Nenga Koran Ditolaya Yungu Yavajatamare.
In given teachings, Honest often quotes from chapter 2, chapter 6, chapter 7 in the Guide to Bodhisattva Way of Life. Also, there are selected verses from Nagarjuna's Root of Wisdom, from Chandrakirti's Supplement to the Middle Way, also from Nagarjuna's Ratnavali, the Precious Garland. So there are a selected group of verses, not many, but a selected group, which contains key points for us to think of. Right? So if you pay attention to those teachings and you can isolate those verses, it gives you quite a lot to work with in terms of your contemplation. You can extract those key points, which are significant points, and contemplate them based upon this collection of few verses.
That Pechatashiman the Richard, the Jaurumji that and the Pechation, the good they would change Tagus, the Kakula Sungures, good they would chat down the Karsna, that shown the chance Devana, the Namalaya, Chikachik, Deva Mambu, the Niachi, and the Trisha on there, the Dilimambu Ingores, and the Chiloma down there, Dimaim by Shon Koran and Nega Imba, and Sajid Nega Kadule, Dodo, Tips and Legend. And D told us on the and D Penatzawa chicken by a D in Java Karkari and the Solas Dutchavan, Nega Kora any Susu and Len to a Jihomana, Nega the Len to Vana, and the Shamba to the Lehouch in the far, and the court to ya down, or Ratri to ya, Dindi Unguya service, rock. Did this song dos?
Zana often says that he's adopting a really smart or easy way to refer to scriptures. So when you study, of course, you can study something extensively. You can look at the classical system, study that extensively, but then you come across different views. So in the system of classics, you come to those reference in which someone says this view, then another person expresses that view. Then you branch out to auxiliary points, and then you come back to the main presentation. So that's what happens when you study it extensively. But then if you're really smart about it, you can find an easy way to encapsulate in your mind the key points from those teachings and hold on to them. So you kind of extract those points, put them in a nutshell, then you use them for your contemplation, which then gives you an excellent way of getting to the actual meaning of those texts. And if you can do that, if you understand the key points of those texts, then it will help you also to easily understand the bigger presentation, the more extensive presentation. So his Honest often says that this is his way of approaching his study. So Geshe says that it's also in some sense indicating to us what could be a good approach to a job with respect to those texts.
대다 간지 아니 경학궁 동학궁 랑다 신기 다지 아니 니견 타다 셈니비기 아니 니버디 잔주 셈니거스 딘지 잔주 셈 다지 아니 따다 무슨 다 될 때는 줘봐이나 아니 된 대원 줘봐야 다지 아니 토보 매바지 루투고 여자 다 딘지 라야 라비아라야 only namji miji baina ani giluchin deg marwas sudigris.
Which means that altogether, when we look at verse 29, it says, since the mind of enlightenment gives you, and the practice gives you the ability to eliminate all thoughts and to ascend from one path to the next, who would become discouraged about it?
Heavinas and sem kyoada liungawa kunsevi chanju semgita tobni shoni lusum devi lamni jevur devandrawala sem shiva kiva sushi gilubon gyur joba nyamsulembala gilubon michawos.
Sorry, I should have said verse 30, not verse 39, verse 30. So we read through verse 30, which says, so having mounted the horse of the mind of enlightenment, we read through that. Let's read through Geshe Damarinchen's commentary. So it says, therefore, having mounted the powerful horse of the mind of enlightenment that dispels all mental tiredness and physical weariness, who of those proficient that know the mind that goes from the path of mental and physical happiness to the result of happiness will be discouraged? It is unsuitable to be discouraged from practicing the Bodhisattva actions.
Da gilu bigi da lelu nimbo zongju toppe wala sums nimbo zongju ki toppe wala sum zongju ki tugi toppe wala tang chenpa de shijin ki choba nyamsu lamba soru chawa tang choba drupala dani ondu chawa was tambo zongju ki tugi toppe wala ni top shungun sun konen dor temba tan giba shibo tambo top shungun sun konen dor temba ni simjen tendu chashe po meden gatan thorwai meba dungan jigbar te fe sam kids.
So we now continue with the second main section in chapter number 7. So up until now, we looked at how we dispel the things which are not conducive to the cultivation of joyous effort. Now we're going to look at increasing the strength of joyous perseverance, the antidote. There are 3 main points to that section. Point A comes under the heading of increasing the strength of the conditions conducive to joyous effort. Then we're going to look at point B and C, devoting oneself to the practice of the conduct by means of mindfulness and introspection. And finally, accomplishing the conduct that is within your power. First thing first, let's look at the cultivation of the 4 powers. So we're going to look at, first of all, brief presentation by means of identifying the 4 powers, covering 2 verses, then an extensive explanation of this section. Now, we'll begin with verse 31. It reads, the army, for the sake of accomplishing the welfare of sentient beings, are interest, steadfastness, joy, and in relinquishment. Interest is developed through fear of suffering and contemplating its benefits.
대다 숨진기 텐트버체 체도스 송주기 민튼촉 정부 본소 깨바니 벤 자비 본소시 신딘 점버다 렌제 쌈 털는 체발라 dumbakkeba mebi top dance mataba jirong de munjula tang ni shuba tanjin tembi top dance cheba zemul juba tar cho mujije ngomba meba zongju gawi top dance zongju zambu lusum tumna ngangsu de somata sombo tol sombo mutorwa tops lago top de shini 종주긴 등계이노 뇌비 떡을 챈듯이 뇌비 떡 거기 동안 지거든 이것도 배워서 깨버 잡아봤어
Kadila mövase dila tak chuba den dawa chila questo
dumba
la dumba
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 되게 등일이야 봐
sure. So looking at Geshe Dhammarin's commentary regarding the generation of the armies that destroy the opposing factors of enthusiasm so as to achieve the purpose of sentient beings. Similar to the king's 4 armies destroying his opponents, the 4 powers are the conducive conditions for enthusiasm. Now, first off, belief, that is aspiration regarding the practice of adopting and abandoning, generated through contemplating karmic cause and effect. Now, belief, since we're using translations that were translated by different people, the vocabulary is slightly different. So, belief was translated in the root verse as interest, right? So, interest or belief, that is the aspiration regarding the practice of adopting and abandoning, generated through contemplating karmic cause and result. Then, stability, that does not start something without investigation, and which finishes what was started. Then joy, that generates effort without satisfaction, but with uninterrupted joy, like a child engaged in play. And finally, the power of relinquishment. Sometimes it's also called the power of suspension. And relinquishment that takes a break when the body and mind are tired through the practice of enthusiastic effort, only to start straight away again once refreshed.
Is it also prevention?
Sorry?
Is it also translated sometimes prevention?
The 4th power?
Yes.
Could be. I haven't seen prevention, but
I don't know to you.
yeah. But
Or moderation?
sorry?
Moderation?
Moderation. I haven't seen that translation as well, but I think that if we get to the meaning, then whatever word works for us is good. So it says, then explaining them by taking the power of belief or interest as an example, they are generated by contemplating the fears of the suffering of cyclic existence and the benefits of the respective power, meaning here belief.
대들 민준 초반대 mödangargel 가도 tor 그냥 온주 또긴 종주 배신 배버차스.
So then it's, as it says in the root verse, right? So it's a different translation. So instead of belief, the word interest is used. So in interest, steadfastness, in Geshe Dhammarin's commentary's translation, it is stability, right? So stability or steadfastness, joy and relinquishment. And also, as Paul pointed out, relinquishment is also sometimes called the power of suspension. Then the next verse says, thus I shall abandon its discordant classes and make effort in order to increase joyous effort through the powers of interest, pride, joy, and relinquishment, diligence, and mastery.
대들 개비추 뉴스 통야 문주바다 달 칼미년도 슌비 민튼초 반디 핀비엔 레바다 나게 템바다 가와다 털이 또 시게라 무지 전시기 종주 풀렘바다 류sem라 왕규 또기니 종주 콘데 베비 체픈 베버차오.
So the commentary says, giving up the opposing factors of not engaging in virtuous dharma through seeing that one is able to, or the discouragement of thinking I'm not able to do this, one generates the conducive conditions of the four powers of belief, the power of stability, joy, and relinquishment. These are the four powers. Then, during the actual practice, one diligently practices enthusiasm with mindfulness and introspection. And through the power of subsequently gaining control over the body and mind, one increases enthusiasm further and further. Strive in such a way.
Niba Jeva Shebala She, Mubi Topdan, Tembi Topdan, Gavi Top, Torbi Top So, Tambo Mubi Topla She, Mubi Yuldan, Jebutan, Mubi Gyub, Jugdo, Mubi Yulasum, Niba Torbatan, Yonden Lambatan, Chebata Manjib, Namrana Tapos, Tambo Niba Torbani, Datan Shingi Nibani, Paume Dagi Shumjati, Kanto Niba Rere Lawn, Kawa Jamsu Sekiwa. Nise tsoba teyin chayan dala manto na dunga padu mebani dako chishe in ma case.
We first off had a brief introduction to the four powers, the power of interest, stability, joy, and relinquishment. Now we have, in looking at the extensive explanation of these four powers, we begin with the power of esteem or the power of interest. Now, that has four powers: the esteemed object, the effect, the cause of esteem, and conclusion. Beginning with the esteemed object, we have three main points: discarding wrongdoings, adopting qualities, and examining the list of things to do and not to do. When we look at the first section, discarding wrongdoings, Shantideva mentions two verses in relation to this section. Let's look at that, verses 33 and 34. I shall destroy the boundless misdeeds of others and myself. At that time, each of these misdeeds will be exhausted in an ocean of eons. But if within myself I do not perceive even a fraction of the endeavor of exhausting these misdeeds, then I have become an abode for boundless suffering. Why does my heart not burst?
The Niba Torse, the Randa Shingi, the Niba di Niba South Savan, the Niba di Shadam Chichinita, Torgoros, Shadam Chin Torelia, the Niba Paudumiroyuza, then Niba Chick Pigida, Chimachi Shadam Chin Toreata, Tizu the Mazuna, Kawa Mangurina, and Tizu Tango. Tindri Chagoras, is that Tindri Kichedo, any Sundu Top Kitchen, any Nibin Nele, Torgo and Nick Harchinita, Niva Paldo Sasha, Tig Chetuta, any Kachin Sundu Tandava, the Kachin Sundu Sundu Matson, the Tape and Kaswada. The Hajang Lokoya, any him a Sujago at Tavroch, and Java, within this some groceries.
So in the first section, Shantideva says that we recall or we recognize the faults that we have accumulated before. We have accumulated faults, others have accumulated faults. So we need then to lay them down and to restrain our mind. And also taking into consideration that we have innumerable faults that we have already committed since time without beginning and up until now. And if we then lay each one of them down, it will take so long and so much power will be required in order to do so. Then here Shantideva says, when you approach that, you see that first of all, you need to initiate joyous effort. Not only you need to undertake it with joyous effort, you start thinking, why have I done those faults? Why have I done them? And why do I not have joyous effort in laying down all those negative actions or all those faults that I have done before? when we start to think of all those faults, as Shantideva says, it almost gives us some heartache in thinking that I have done so many faults before, and I haven't undertaken joyous effort in laying them down.
텐즈다 다또 마기나 가능용 인증 또 비고도 산비다 아니 또 아니 샘리야다 남자다 무슨 비고도 왔어.
So here we need to make a pledge in our heart. We need to then make the pledge that we will generate this power.
다다단 신기 예반 빠도 네바 다기 좀버 차디 샘기 비트니 테다 감지 비체로 예반 좀비 투 칸도 예바 레레라 까와장수 임부 콤베 세번기와 임발레 예바 세비 좀버 디 차시 장야 달라 만토나 임부 대종 공부라 무전나 남부 동안 용코비 동아 빠도 네베 에스티다 지시체 이마케버 뷰스 다기
One should destroy the boundless faults of self and others because one has made that promise at the time of generating the mind. When one destroys these faults, one meditates on the antidote for a notion of even for each individual fault. Since it will come like this if one does not observe the beginning of having started to abandon faults, even partially on oneself, then one will have to experience the sufferings of the lower realms, since one cannot bear to meditate on the antidote even that much. Since one will become an abode for boundless suffering, why does one's heart not explode? One's heart is completely made of stone, I say.
아니 예바 빠도메바 사요리 삼비기 삼노드 메나 아니 예바 돈두키 아니 삼바 슈타고디 대 용사요 말아서 라 하드드 다지 개원 하면서 다 마테마이네 신디 톨이야 라 아니 신디 톨이야 론디 나노야 다완 디 나노야 dunta 디 나노야 지 수수 게디 카치미 니바 카르치 여버디 직 샘나야 템버다 텔레야 직 여버지 메나 아니 니바 돈두키 아니 삼바 슈타버디 아니 베히나야 아니 수갸버다 위기다 직 여버디 용고 마르와스
We have committed countless faults already. We have accumulated countless faults. And when Shantideva here speaks of having to abandon those faults, then one thing is that we have, of course, performed faults in this life as well as in previous life, as after all, since we've been around since time without beginning. But we don't really recall or remember the things that we have done in our previous lives, right? So at least we can think of what we've done in this life, not only in this life, for example, in the past year, in the past month, in the past day. We need at least to be able to recall some of the virtues and the negativity stuff we have done before. And if we do not develop a sense of regret, a strong sense of regret for the faults that we've already committed in the past, we're not going to be able to generate that heartache or this pain in our heart, this discomfort in our heart that will cause us to engage in a practice of purification in which we lay down those faults and restrain our behavior.
쇼자우니 메주치 그래도스 간지 미 니바 카르치기에네면야 조디 아니 소수 셈이야 자링도스 라 아니 산지점네데 다니다기 건데네 다니다기 자이스 젠 수시 건주 손데디 조 투사디 소수레야 투데요바 댄 소수 셈레야 투데요바 라 어디디 손자 아니 만주 셈디 only be same in by now, and so never culture di, and shimbada, chambada, deep chambi, this shill shabitoni, and never trovata, and yondin lembigi, and panan judo chevaina, and Nima Yagi catch a yatam in Guas race, the never and never on later.
We need to be able to see our own faults. So Geshe said that, for example, with respect to himself, he explains it to others, speaks about it to others, but still without being able to see his own faults, his own misdeeds. So we need to be able to see our own faults, our own misdeeds. And that depends upon the mind. Just as in one of the teachings that the Buddha gave, he says, I am my own protector. I am my own witness. I am my own savior. Who else will protect me? Who else would be my savior? So the ability to see our own faults depends upon ourselves. It depends upon our mind. So on a mental level, we need to understand or to know the misdeeds that we have done before. We need to recall those negative actions and to know in a good way how to engage in what we need to do, how to take up what needs to be taken up, and how to cast aside what we need to discard. And we also need to do it daily, right? One day after the next. And if we take it up daily as a daily practice, we will improve. It is 100% guaranteed that if we apply ourselves to that practice daily, continuously, we will improve. Otherwise, we're not going to have a basis of improvement, of making a progress.
And even Yondan Lambanis, Yondan Lambani, that and Shinji Yondan, Mambudagi Dushatis, Tell Yondan, really young, Kawajang to Konguna, Dagi Yondan, Chalayan, Kombanaya Magidi, Shishi Tani, Kevan, Dagi Tumi Chivas.
We've covered the first point in that section that explains the discarding of wrongdoing. Let's look at the second point, which is adopting qualities. Again, there are two verses that Shantideva covers in this section. It says, I shall accomplish many excellent qualities for others and myself, and I will acquaint myself with each of these qualities through a notion of eons. But I've never developed acquaintance with even a fraction of these excellences. How strange it is to make without purpose the birth I have somehow found.
Tedadini Tig Rodan Chikwa, Kagio, Chig Nivichol of Hard, and Chig Yunding Chol to Kajun sometime trend of the Yunding by the Rand the Shingi Yundin Tada, the Rangi Duja Redishas, Suzula Goyach Redishas, the Yunding Chik Samlayania, be any Chik Chanzanji to Togochona, any Gao Mamburia, any Komba Machina, any Yunding Chadi. And Yongtu Mundas. That Digi Chigi Chatsam Combat any Comji Loch Tata and Mena the condition any Nanzukulaya, any Chik Toby on the Benachanju said the condition Kigris draw.
Now, this section that explains the adopting of qualities and the previous section that explains the discarding of misdeeds or wrongdoings are getting at the same point. Now, they're looking at it from, you could say, different perspectives, but at the end of the day, they're getting at the same point. So thinking of adopting qualities, if in order to adopt a certain quality, you need to create habits, and that sometimes requires habituation that takes place for countless eons, then if we don't have effort in cultivating even a fraction of equality, how will that come to pass? How will we be able to cultivate good qualities that do require habituation if we cannot cultivate joyous effort, even with respect to a fraction of good qualities.
다 디기 끼운다 마서 참어 간이 끼운 쇼도 슬라운디 다기 투미 치를 사세 라 아니 소소라야 이게 다와게든 조진 상이 리된 지금 요르데이네 디 아니 데메 제발 된 아니 연대 마기 와디 데메 제발 된 조사가 이마디 때문에 먹어 버려왔어
Come, Miguel, children. Okay. It said at the end of verse 36, how strange it is to make without purpose this birth that I have somehow found. This birth with the 8 freedoms and the 10 richnesses. So if we don't make effort in the cultivation of good qualities and abandoning faults, how strange it is to make without purpose the birth of 8 freedoms and 10 richnesses that we have somehow found.
다다 신기 타바도 탐지기 연대니 망보 다기 드버차데 대대 탐지 비체를 내가 연대 마음을 따서 샘비다고 그러지 까와 장수 공부치 공부를 기르나 다기 연대 대대가 차는 공부나야 마기 뒤유리 뭐시 지식과 인입이 단주기 깨와는 다기 샘비 되면봐 추수 집에 사시 이익 집이 인치고
It says one should establish the many qualities of one's own and others' liberation and enlightenment because one has promised to do so. Not to mention all the qualities, if it is necessary to meditate for a notion of eons, even for one individual quality of the marks and signs, then one has not started to even partially meditate on those qualities. It is strange that I make meaningless this birth, which is with its freedoms and endowments for this and future rebirths, now when somehow I found it after such a long time. This is an expression of despair.
다 제바도 맞지봐 남자는 따와네스 다기 좀데 만주지 가든 친구 대만진 때나 제와 마세다 엄분 삼도 좀 맞지 지가 민직 맞진다 냠다 대만진다 마이가도 숨는다 둥한바지 끼버세스.
Then the last point in this section is examining the list of things to do and not to do. Again, that's with respect to the esteemed object or the object of interest. So it says in the next couple of verses, 37 and 38, I have not made offerings to the Bhagavan. I have not given the pleasures of great festivals. So I have not performed actions for the teachings. I have not fulfilled the wishes of the poor. I have not granted fearlessness to the frightened, and I have not given happiness to the wretched. All I have given rise to are the agonies in the mother's womb and suffering.
Then driven us that the solution. Munche dag jomden digi chembi kunjosumla ani chobayang humudus simjen namda dijin shebala ningurwi gadun chembi devayang chemudus paningi torne sujendo madrubi tembala chawa machebadang simjen umbun samba zogo machebadang umbona yantachi ani umbun rewananji jimba matang sogapa jadang ne sojin jigbala minjigwa majibadang 민지비 진바에 깹지 진바에 맞지 동harji 냠타발라 대와야 맞지나 담문체 다기 담비 쩌바 카야 맞지시 다 마이가지 숨무다 동하 바시케바 세기 젠든지 맞지 게보스.
So in explaining the object of interest as we undertake joyous effort, here Shantideva points out the things that we have done and mainly the things that we have not done. So it says, previously I did not make offerings to the three jewels who are represented by the Tathagata, nor did I offer the happiness of great celebrations that praise sentient beings in the Tathagata. I did nothing for the teaching, since I did not practice accordingly the presentation of the objects of abandonment that have to be abandoned in the antidotes that have to be adopted. I also did not accomplish the wishes of the sentient beings who are destitute. I did not offer the protection to those in danger from enemies or sicknesses. So remember that when we think of the different types of generosity, there is material generosity, generosity of giving the Dhamma, and generosity of giving protection from fear. So here it says, I did not offer protection to those in danger from enemies or sicknesses. I did not practice generosity of giving fearlessness. I also did not offer satisfaction to those that are wretched due to suffering, and hence I have not practiced the Holy Dhamma at all, and have only caused pain and suffering while being in the mother's womb.
Tirda ganji nganzu mi liden leyanti, ra ani mai ngani ma tachi kiwi dungar shuch nyangi lebi tachi godinj gogros, ra di godin di ani mai ngani kiwi godin so di ani luden di ichedroch, ra luden di leni goba kariyarsangi tele keba kariyarsangi tan namju purdu chonch. Drova shen devi namju purdu chonch di tolaya rangi devata mase and simja tamji gi dede drip tungi niva jonza di tat madeni and ko simje shemba nashin chin drova no and keram mai ngani ma kiwi dunga nyonya di and kyores choche me charas gera dunga nyonya zamado shemba keram mi kewa ngani gode che me chawares ro tanda diris.
It says at the end of this section, all I've given rise to are the agonies in the mother's womb and suffering. So when we think of the suffering that we experience in samsara, one of the suffering is the suffering of birth. So for what end do we go through the suffering of birth? We go through the suffering of birth for the sake of acquiring a body, this body. So this body entails also an opportunity for marvelous wisdom. So we can develop this marvelous wisdom, not only to be able to be of benefit to ourselves, but also in order to provide others with happiness and purpose, for the purpose and happiness of oneself. So if we do not do that, what purpose is there in going through the suffering of birth? There's no purpose whatsoever if we do not accomplish our own welfare as well as the welfare of others.
Pena gongani kiwaro chadito da gongani kiwon pigi ngani ma thembe ka wuchi kejo lomba ga jang ngongwa dunga nyango maras ani koran kini sedigi to ani ton ragores suzupu putun so tugores and big desert change so to that indeed sort of something nganzo mesit kin deba no mesit tola tele ani ro shemba ji bilan shabana ki dunga de nyongo maras ro.
When we consider other states of rebirth, such as, for example, being born from an egg, so you could say that there is a suffering of birth, as you're born in that state of existence. One hatches from the egg. So whatever one experiences in that state of existence is not done for the sake of developing the wisdom that would be able to make us capitalize on our own and others' welfare. It is for the sake of that lifetime only. So a bird, for example, can protect itself, can build the nest, can feed itself, and so forth, look for food and so forth. So all of these affairs are affairs that belong to this lifetime only. So then looking at our state of existence, if we take care of this lifetime's affair only, take care of, rather than the nest, and take care of our house, abodes, resources, pleasures that we can get in this lifetime only, what difference would there be between ourselves and other states of existence, like, for example, being born from an egg?
then even maybe dribble any chilla meba tom ribadans. Di Gunzeno, Tambo chilla meba tom ribani, Dan Honda Tadaya, chilla meda Tawai, Humban didn't join you. Sushi chilla meba tons.
Now, the second main point in the power of esteem or the power of interest is the effect, consisting of 2 points. It is unreasonable to abandon esteem for the Dhamma, and the reason for that. Let's begin with verse 39. It says, in the past and even now, such deprivations are arising because of my lack of interest in the Dhamma. Who would reject this interest in the Dhamma?
Dan Honda Tadaya, Nation, each going give you chilla meba the Tawai, Tadon Kovi Gumbi, Humban Dindra, John Guinness, Keba Sushi, Peter Namji, Keba Sushi, chilla meba ton, Govale, Taran Devi, chilla meba Keba Chavas.
Section is quite clear. It's in the commentary, so let's read through that. Through having been separated from belief in the Holy Dhamma, both by way of ascertaining and faith in the present and in the past, I'm experiencing the destitution of being held by the degenerations of cyclic existence. Who that is proficient would give up the belief for the Dhamma? Those that wish to be liberated from degeneration should generate belief for the Dhamma. Do you say belief for the Dhamma or believe in the Dhamma? Belief in the Dhamma. Okay.
Terda Kanji, Ani Nanzukia Toma Mevan Tandabad, Koal name Devadi, Ani Chula Meva, maybe onk, Chula Meva Che Matuga onk, Koal never was. Ani Nira Dacham Soba, Ani Sani Samba, Sanjil Soba, Chula Meva Kivi Togi, Ani Ya Tavisalaya, Jotu was, Kanji Kavadi was.
Here, Shantideva points out the difference between ourselves and other bodhisattvas, such as those that abide on the ground. We haven't been able to develop trust or belief in the Dhamma, esteem in the Dhamma, where those that abide on the ground, those bodhisattvas, for example, that ascend from ground to ground, do so through their belief and great esteem in the Dhamma. No.
Di Junzenis, Niva Di Junzeni, gave you chon Tamji Gitsawa Mevan Tumesons.
So then the next point is the reason for that, right? So we're still looking at the effect. Now, looking at the first 2 lines in verse 40, it reads, the Muni himself said that interest is the root of every class of virtue.
Radza Sanjomden Digi, so the Mebala 2 years, so years. The Meba Yonya depend on Gava Chevalaya, Meba Yonya di, and Gava Singdi Karimba, Moshingo does, and di Gava Mo, and it gave Chava, gave Javon, gave Pay Kariyaba di, Tombaina, Tom Tubaina, and Gava Chevalaya, Meba Yungros.
And when this section speaks about having trust or interest, having that sense of esteem for virtue, in order to do that, we need to understand what the nature is of virtue. What activities are virtuous activities? What are the results of virtuous activities? Through an understanding of the nature, the activities, the result that they bring, we develop interest and esteem for virtues.
데리다 로 계속다 개원 원초벌이야 개원 원초벌이야 게딕 방랑생이지 간지 게딕 방랑생이지 용국도 왔어 게딕 방랑신고도 왔어 게딕 방랑신원디기 게어다 디비기 규피기 게빌레다 미기빌레세 레그도 이기 자와 아니 딜이야 아니 leg vichalaya gewa and ni vichalaya migiwa sete di namja di singuda ta di sion di tenichi sed zamayin ba gewa kama namsu sabi and gedi gi namja dia injimini singwa ya dia ani digwa khansa ba di shabdam chuje majibana yoya meba dinti gi khoji chi meba ina 아니 지금 망발에 지금 토그리스 라운드 아니 디체도 코라노야 아니 슈기암 로데바나 하사비 디발이야 방언 수준도 맞지나 아니 치 중규기 아니 개화생이 돼야 주투야 가부슈치 어디리 차도 왔어
So we need to be introduced to virtues. We need to be introduced to what we need to take up and what we need to cast aside. And in order to do that, we need to understand what constitutes virtues. What are virtues? What are non-virtues? Virtues are those things which we regard as positive. Non-virtues are those things which we consider as negative. These are not those negativities, those non-virtues, those that have those negative aspects. And we haven't done them only in this life. We've also accumulated them in past lifetimes. So this is also something that we need to be introduced to, something that we need to understand, right? So we need to understand virtues. We need to understand what we need to take up and what we need to cast aside. And we also need to understand that we have been doing that not only in this life, but also in previous lifetimes. And all of that knowledge is required for the sake of purification, without laying down on negative actions and restraining a mind in the process of purification, even if we seek to develop some qualities, even if we seek to develop virtue, we're not going to be able to accomplish it well, or it will be very difficult to accomplish virtue without also including practices for purification of negative actions we have done in this and previous lifetimes.
저는 기위촉 탐지기 자와 기위추 지단에 봤다 이 집에 매번 튼비 송소 대답 나와주면 돌이 송소 송번 매비길니 때마다 쉐보 방분 돌 때마다 써야 돼 대 자와 따도 남면 제보고 소스.
So the commentary to this section says the Able One of the Buddha taught that the root of every class of virtue is the belief that has the trust in virtuous objects the way they have been ascertained. It is taught like this in the Sutra of the Moon Lamp. So we have covered this point. Let's look at the third point in the main section that explains the power of interest, the power of esteem, which is the cause for esteem. There are 2 points in that section: brief explanation and extensive explanation. Beginning with the last 2 lines in verse 40 that present the succinct presentation. It says, its root is constant acquaintance with the ripening results.
레초라 메바 태양 자와 따도니 게미기 레다 남미기 데볼라 이 제바 곰베 소스 렌데라 네바 레버 마니나 슈 칸야 야와기비 네바 미니비 델라 베버 차오스.
It says the root of belief in turn is to meditate on belief in the virtues and non-virtuous karmas and their ripening results. If one has not ascertained karmic cause and effect well, then one has not found a realization of the Dhamma that will please the Buddhas. Therefore, one should strive in it.
같이 동반이랑 이번이밖에 세니 렌데라 미즈와네 동반이기 고 신주로도 소와이노스.
The fact that some who say that they've ascertained emptiness, then disregard karmic cause and effect, invalidates their understanding of emptiness.
대다 동반인 세티지 가야 매박 소리지 지안 지기 매박 소리지 야 상당바이나 아니 렌젤에 찍고야기 gense 거를 차고 말았어 동반인 되는데 딘지 많이 봐 동반인 되는데 꼭 거랑 다 고아지 이어와 디라바이나 아니 남주 게딕 방랑 간치버티 탐지기 아니 남샤티 태바지다 근데 대한배 아니 개침부지 임바디 통투거리스 로
Some claim that they have understood emptiness and they develop a nihilistic approach. Their understanding of emptiness entails the thought that nothing whatsoever exists. And if they think that nothing whatsoever exists, then also they think that therefore they should have no consideration for karma, actions and results, because that also does not exist. But this is not a correct understanding of emptiness, is it? Whereas when you develop a good understanding of emptiness, you also see that the presentation of karma, virtues and non-virtues, is admissible. And thereby, your way of behaving, your way of performing action becomes more considered.
Taniba Shebala Sums, Jamie Lender Sambatan. Kanan Jemasin Susan, and Jamie Lender Sambatan. Chick to Karbi. Le Give said Sambatan. Now we le give it Sambos. Tambo Jamie Le Sambani. Dunga Yimi Devatan. Jivan number Pasota. Devan number Tavan. Digvachel joiners.
The extensive explanation of the cause for esteem in the Dhamma is reflecting on mixed karma and its effect, reflecting on solid white karma and its effect, and reflecting on black karma and its effect. Let's begin with 3 verses, 41, 2, and 3. We begin actually with verse 41. Let's read through verse 41. It says, suffering, mental unhappiness, the various kinds of fear as well as separation from what is desired will arise from negative deeds.
Rowanamsu Luki Dungan, Sigi so immediate, Madame Mamma Sobin, Jiwa number Hasotan, Zasheta non Joso, Devanam the Tavani, Chavita, Dungan, Gutu de, and Divachable in join Guris, Divapon and Bevatans.
Because the physical sufferings of migrators, the mental feelings of unhappiness, the different horrors of humans and non-human existences, and separation from the objects of one's wishes, such as friends, relatives, wealth, and so forth, all arise from the cause of negative behavior. One should strive in abandoning negativities.
The deans are Rosary, Yilasambi Geshe, Kanda Kandun, Rokirwa. Terdan ten sonum di cevi yönginçü unçugürs unçugür deva çeba den dökyan kanda kandu döküyor dedi deva di dongan çünkü namançımız.
And that being the case, Shantideva says, by performing virtues intended in the mind, wherever I go, due to those merits, there shall I be honored with the excellences that are their results. Although one who commits misdeeds wishes for happiness wherever he goes, those misdeeds will completely destroy him with the weapons of suffering.
Pansam yukonelandi yilasambi gewa chibi. Kenin kanda kandun rowa chigewa teda ti givi sonum ti nami gibi yonden nomba choba euros. 삼라선 대둥 대바짬지 제수 제가 많이 대바집이 간사 대원 되냐 중이기 간다 간도 로원기와 대대된 대바디 동아지 중기 넘버 좀 기회 대바봉하는 대버 차워스.
So continuing with the reading of the commentary, so in relation to verse 42, it says, having created the virtue one intended to do in one's mind, motivated by the mind of abandoning, whichever birthplace one then migrates to, there one will, through these merits, be honored by the resulting qualities of the ripening result. And then the commentary to verse 43, let's read just through this verse. Although those creating negativity wish for happiness, wherever they migrate to, they will, through this negativity, be destroyed by the weapons of suffering. This will, however, not follow just as the wish for happiness is suffering. Although the person acting non-virtuously wishes for happiness by nature, wherever they migrate to, there they will, through the negativity, be destroyed by the weapons of suffering. Therefore, one should strive in abandoning negativity.
어디다 대자가 대두 승인디 아니 레게디기 제순 정글에 마도 아니 지 대바 잠치기 제순 장 투마다스로 아니 개워체나 대바 용글에 대바체나 동호 용글에 마도 그냥 대바 잠치기 대바 용대야지다 디디 지 자인 마레스 대자 게디 파나 그냥 대바 되우여 바이나
Your happiness and the wish to avoid suffering will not come at will. They will come about through behaving in a certain way. If you behave virtuously, you will experience happiness, whereas if you behave negatively, you experience suffering. Since happiness and suffering do not arise at will, you do need to focus on and make effort in the cultivation of virtue and the abstention from negative actions. Tanda chick to carbe led just somebody. So therefore, just to finish off the reading of this section in the commentary, the qualities of the results are the mode of the nature of the result.
Taniba chick to carbe lend somebody. Gave chula combo chibi. Gavi Sebonam Devachengi Shinsu Kivanas Gachi Trizan Seve, Pemi Yemburne, Gavi Soni, Sigi Sigi Chipa Tue Kiki, Peman Lechon, Luchoche, Gavin Deni, Deshi Sisu, Gavin Kurs.
In the excessive explanation of the cause for esteem, we looked at the section of reflecting on mixed karma and its effect. Let's look at the second point, which is reflecting on solely white karma and its effect in verse 44. Now, before we look at the wordings of the verse, Geta Dhammarinchen in his commentary begins with a statement, saying, through having meditated on virtuous dhammas, the children of the conquerors take rebirth in the land of great bliss and delight. To that, when we read through verse 44, it says, as a result of virtue, I will become a spiritual children of the Sugata, dwelling in the hearts of the vast, fragrant, and cool lotuses. The food of the victor's pleasant speech will cause my splendor to grow. My supreme body will emerge from a lotus that will unfold due to the light of the Munis, and I will abide in the presence of the victors.
Keni Gacheshi, Yamba, Trizanshi, Yudonwa, Devakivi, Rejesavi, Keni Kabar, Pemi Kimbur Nebo, Jigibi Kazigi, Sovali, Kabar to Kiva, 양라 주주의 대비 자유송 행보되었다. 이 조제 대권이 또 시기 시제단 단계를 진 기위 개발 두번 대신시비 외기 카치시 예벌 지비 빼만이 총 리디 개발 셈비티비 민촉진 용순 대비 개발 기위신이 개발 돌면서 개발 여밤에서 개윈되는 내는 이 주기 경험때 개발 대단히 되는 거는 대신 센서기 지도 기위를 내 총알에서 기위 교로스
The commentary to verse 44 reads, through having meditated on virtuous dhammas, the children of the conquerors take rebirth in the land of great bliss and delight. We read through that section, then verse 44. Then it says, they abide in the center of the lotus, that is the characteristic of birthplace, a peaceful, a beautiful, fresh, and vast, expansive, fragrant lotus that generates bliss just by touching it. Instead of living off worldly foods, they listen to the more distinguished melodious teachings of the Buddhas that possess the 60 qualities of enlightened speech and generate splendor and complexion to the full of the realization of its subject emptiness. To arise from a lotus opened and unfolded by the luminosity of the able one, the Tathagata, it is the characteristics of birth. They possess the characteristics of body, a supreme body with the marks and signs, as the characteristics of teacher. They abide in front of Amitabha Buddha and the like, and are carried by the Dhammas. By way of these characteristics, the children of the Tathagatas come about solely through white virtuous karma.
이제 간지 야위세에서 남도 간지 아니 센달 베시기 게임비 비기 따지 그 따위 처음 미시비 아니 상기 그 캬버젠디 아니 육개와 제발 육개와 바시 제발 때는 총말했어 어디서 것을
Looking at what this section indicates, it refers to those children of the Tathagatas born in a particular state in which they behold a Buddha body adorned with the major marks and minor signs. That can only arise due to virtues, due to positive virtues.
다순반 나비 렌데 삼바니 신지 교 빠빠마니 신비 신주 냠타지 rabdu savi me shibi sanshudela lujula bavi radu donto kin shayutumbo galaxy shindumbavi chakisaji homegi mamukyurs.
The last point in the extensive explanation of the cause for esteem is reflecting on black karma and its effects in verse 45, which reads, as a result of many non-virtues, I'll be very wretched due to all my skin without exception being ripped off by the henchment of Yama. Molten copper melted by tremendous heat will be put into my mouth. Pierced by flaming swords and daggers, my flesh will be cut into hundreds of pieces, and I shall plummet upon the fiercely blazing iron ground. This is serious.
속초발로 소비 내기 녀와 신지 개우 빠빠마르가 슈비 동할기 신도 냠타지 롱주기 개발 rabdu 사위 매 슈비 상순기 코와 르르르번기 서깔 대마스 멤버 라르다 동동기 네비 샤유 동부 야타 투만 하스 포원교 내기 개발 신도 바위 짜기 사지 동 냠타원교니 샘메 다 최고의 소비 내무기와 마음을 대단히 원교로.
Due to the karma of killing and so forth, one will be extremely tormented by suffering, as well as one's skin is being pulled off by the minions of the Lord of Death. The characteristics of engagement, which is that copper molten by the extreme heat is put into one's body, is difficult to bear. Not only this, but one will be pierced by flaming swords and daggers, and one's flesh will be carved up into many hundreds of pieces. The experience of being tormented by the characteristics of place, which means that one falls into the blazing iron grounds, comes about through the many non-virtuous karmas, such as the immediate karmas, the karma of abandoning the Dharma and the like.
16두와 찍어서 16두와는 대외 계라 묘체시 그번 인도 검버차스.
So let's look at a summary of this section. Right? So the conclusion of the power of esteem, the power of interest, the first power. We have two lines pertaining to that section. The first two lines in verse 46. It says, therefore, I should be interested in virtue and with great respect acquaint myself with it.
대인자다 대외는 렌즈 출신도 삼니 개발라 묘가 체시 이치비고니 이치니비고니 아니 그번에도 검버차우스.
Therefore, having contemplated the way of karmic cause and effect, one should practice belief in virtue and meditate on it with great respect by way of having belief. Let's leave it here for now. Nyododa lama sangye jogile jowa chikya malupa de salagapa sho janchu sancho rinpoche mahe pama kegyochi kevanya bane pa gone gondo pewa sho kowe shinkandi pendande wa malu juwene chenre siwante zinga tsoi Shapesi te badu tengyuchi Janshin jangun yawe Te zingyun pewe Koto dopote Choson kowe lemon tudu Adan sodu jikondu shaten shu.
Dans kutsafilyoti.
Demiş ki çıkıyoruz. Taramasın.